Welcome all. This is Gerald Clark with Seven Planet Broadcasting. And today is January 7th, 2020. Can you believe that? And I'm here with my really one of my favorite people in the world, Julian Poulsen. And we haven't caught up in a while, so we've started warming up the dialogue already, but I could tell we're both ready to go. Julian, say hi to everybody. And then I want you to repeat what you just said to me a minute ago about you caught me off guard with that one.
Hello, everyone, and that's Gerald Clark for you. He puts you on the spot. Here's the first sentence within a podcast where we start speaking about synchronicity.
Oh, yes.
And when we become intuitive, because the mind is not involved anymore, so our sensitivity for energies increase. And then at some point we realize that the experience that we're having, the holographic simulation, that we like to call it in that sense, the world, the creation, is constantly in communication with us in a metaphorical manner, or sometimes even in a literal manner. For many of you who might have had experience of synchronicity, that you, for example, had a thought and suddenly a bus drives by and there's an advertisement with a sentence on it that answers your exact thought. Or you walk down the street and there's a street name which answers your exact thought. So at some point you realize that you're in a deep, deep dialogue with something that you perceive as outside of yourself, but it's not separated from you. It's constantly communicating with you, either in images or in language. And there might be moments where, for example, you watch a movie and for some reason you know that a sentence in that movie is meant for you. And this is something that, let's say, Western psychiatry doesn't get. When people have these mystical experiences, they say, well, I heard a voice through the radio and it said this to me, right? And then they say, well, you're psychotic, you're schizophrenic, but it's not a schizophrenic if there is no ego, you see? Yeah, it needs to be an ego for somebody to be in a schizophrenic or psychotic state. So at some point when your meditation is deep in day-to-day life, you suddenly begin realizing that there is an order in the universe. That means there are no random events. It's just when you use the mind that is so limited, the mind is incapable of deciphering the information. It doesn't have the meta-intelligence. It's trapped in a localized intelligence, right? So then when we get meditative, we go beyond that localized intelligence, and then we have this intuitive sense of everything is making sense, everything is working harmonically, and everything is communicating. And it's true. It is just simply that intuition cannot be downloaded as information into the brain because the brain cannot hold that capacity of information. Let's say if you know something intuitively from hundreds of incarnations, we cannot download hundreds of incarnations in your brain. The nervous system is not able to maintain such an information. Yeah, it would be a great shock to the nervous system. So you simply get a signal from your soul, and that signal is intuition, and you just know things but without having, let's say, the mathematical or language information, yeah, because it would be an overload of the system.
In technical terms, Julian, I'll put this in for the computer nerds. Okay, so what happened was your RAM is full with the current operating system and all the parameters you need to run the current avatar simulation software, right? So all of a sudden, a synchronicity happens where it's operating beyond your local mind, which in a way, all our minds are connected through universal consciousness, through, you could call it even the electric universe theory if you wanted to, but we're all connected. So we view a synchronicity as some magical thing when actually it's like a system interrupt coming in going, hey, I need some RAM space to put in some local context because there's a lesson here from another parallel dimension that you need to have so you can process faster, right?
Yes, I mean that is what intuition basically is. It invites you to drop your software, yeah. And so when you think about intelligence, there are layers of intelligence. So this is why mystical writing is sometimes a little bit misleading if you don't have mystical experience, because let's say it's not the writing itself that is misleading, but if you go at it with mind or with an academic mindset, a lot of times you will create ideas and beliefs that block the intuitive knowledge. So therefore the intuition comes in, gives you, for example, a déjà vu, where something aligns. for example, a past life memory kicks in and the deja vu says, right now, pay attention, a lesson is going to be repeated and you need to be the witness right now. You need to be there, you need to be present. So it's an override of the ego, right? And in that moment, the localized intelligence that is the ego, that in an essence, if we go really, really deep, ego is every identification that you have ever made. No matter if it is an object of thought, no matter if it is an emotion, no matter if it is the experience of a body, everything that you call I becomes an ego because you identify with a part of an experience. But the experience is not in that sense yourself. It is happening, you're witnessing it, and you pick certain parts of the experience out and say, this is myself. Now something enters an intuitive sense. I'm not limited to the identity that I've created for myself. I'm not limited to the self-concept that I have created for myself. You get invited to go beyond this prison of mind. So intuition kicks in. And as of yet, many whose abilities not as developed yet brush it off. Oh, they say that that's a fluke. And they try to sweep it aside. But with further meditation practice, and this is where we spoke about frequencies and energy, let's say everything is a frequency that you experience. Yeah, it is energy organized in a certain way that you have an experience. So we know this in telecommunication. We know that calling someone on the phone is a frequency. Seeing something on the screen is a frequency. Video games have a frequency. They are the dimension in itself. So dimension is simply the separation via frequency. So when I understand that in meditation, I drop the local frequency by letting go of it, by accepting it. So I bring it into balance. Now I raise in energy. When I raise in energy, psychic abilities start developing. So this is what yoga is about. Yoga is about enhancing the avatar that you have to such a degree that it becomes more and more an authentic representation of your soul consciousness.
Exactly. That, hey, I don't want to interrupt you, but what you just said right there is so important. Okay, I want to expound on it just a little bit.
All right.
The practice of yoga, what I just heard you say was, does something to this here avatar so that it can be more prone to what? More optimized for what? The experience of energy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so what is it we're doing to this? A simple engineering way to say that is structure is energy. In other words, you change this and you'll change the sensation of energy. Okay, let's keep going with that. Real simple. Yeah. Okay, so what is it about this? Okay, if I can change like this, does this change my energy? Does this change my, so structure is energy all of a sudden. Our hand mudras, channeling energy, all of a sudden you got to ask yourself that question. What is it about this that changes energy?
Okay, so let's say when energy has a structure, we perceive it as information. All right? So when you look at a house, it has 4 corners and you can measure them. The energy is arranged in a way that you, for example, see a geometrical form. All right?
Right. So we can add structure in there too. Structure is function and structure is energy. Because functionally, the structure of something, a bipedal thing is going to operate functionally different than a quadruped, for instance.
Yes.
The structure is predicates its function. Somewhere.
All right. So
Like
let's say the structure that is your avatar. So I want to make this very clear. Neither you nor me are a person. Nor anyone who's listening is a person. We are experiencing personhood. Exactly. This is what you realize when you sit in meditation. You start observing the psyche, you start observing the emotion, you start observing the body. And the more you observe, you realize all of that is coming and going. But the witness, the awareness that is there is never coming and going, no matter if this body dies or not. So when you find that awareness, you realize that you're experiencing an avatar in a holographic experience that we call the universe. Now this avatar has certain limitations put on it. What are those limitations? Memory. Well, what type of memory? DNA is millions of years of memories of survival, right? They limit you because they are a program. Trauma is memory, is a program that limits you. Cell memory can be a program that limits you. So when you draw identity from memory, this is the ego, and then you're trapped in the experience. Therefore, what do we do in meditation? We watch all those type of memories and phenomena, and by watching it, we disidentify, and we start transcending. Now our energy state changes. So awareness that is timeless, that is not trapped in any type of condition, because memory is conditional, you see? So something that is timeless is entering. And this timeless intelligence, when it enters the avatar more consciously, starts transforming it just by presence. This is the key to the teaching of Eckhart Tolle. When you get that, you get that. So you invite this intelligence in, and just through the awareness, you stop reacting to your memory. When you stop reacting to your memory, you stop reinforcing the conditions. So your ego starts breaking down. Illusion of personhood starts breaking down. But now we want to enhance our avatar further. Why do we want to do this? Because we are not trapped in a localized intelligence that is the brain. So we want to access the rest of our intelligence that exists on another dimensional frequency. Well, how do we do this? We need to increase our bandwidth. How do we increase our bandwidth? Yoga. Well,
there you go.
What does it do? It changes our nervous system, doesn't it? Okay. So suddenly our nervous system can perceive frequencies that before it couldn't perceive.
Exactly. Exactly. You changed the structure, and now the sensitivity of energy for higher function all of a sudden becomes present, right?
There we go.
Okay. Well, I wanted to give you a model to play with, and it may be a little crude for the kind of people that were raised in the cultural software that you run around with, but I see that as being a human antenna, and the structure of an antenna in relationship to frequency is pretty obvious to a communications engineer, okay? In terms of receiving and not seeing the energy, blah, blah, blah. So when I see a body that is unstructured because gravity had its way with it, or it was born with the rubber bands glued to areas of the popsicle sticks, which are your bones, in an asymmetrical manner, all the way back to birth, okay? And it's species wide. It's not just one kid, okay? This is what I discovered in structural integration. And thanks to Dr. Ida Rolf and her discoveries about how to help her own kid with this kind of problem, that led to this generalization of, what can we do to this avatar body to straighten it out so it works better in the gravity field? Period. Just balance it so it distributes weight correctly from top to bottom of the ground. Well, the impact of that on the human energy body, they don't talk about that much, but the result is more incredible than anything I can even describe, Julian. It's like when the human energy field template, whatever you want to call it, finds relief from the structure aligning with an infinite force like gravity. When those two come together, the avatar truly knows that it is what you said before, operating in non-local reality, accessing multiple dimensions, an aggregate of this energy and this frequency as a result of the function that's created by a structure that can easily move in the gravity field. This is the goal of yoga, is ease of posture in the gravity field. Why? So that you can be in a meditative state, relaxed in the gravity field, especially sitting up, or actually even especially standing up. Okay, that's the hardest. But if you can sit.
Jared, your microphone is fading.
It is?
Oh, now it's back. Now it's back.
Oh, it says something about my internet connection went unstable for a second. Okay.
All right.
Are we back? Okay. I didn't mean to go off on a rant, but you see the power of this avatar structure changing with yoga that gives you access to the chakras in a better, more optimal, refined, distinguished way. This comes with playing with meditation. You thought you discovered this. Well, that's also true with a combination of a couple of the things. and one of the most powerful of all, that needs to happen even before or coincident with yoga, is structural integration. Because when that antenna starts getting aligned, all this starts happening naturally on its own. It just starts happening. The reconnection to your higher self, the melding of the energy template that works with your DNA to create your avatar,
Yes.
Coinciding with that easy place in gravity where you're not struggling to be in the field, you finally realize you got to be in relationship to it correctly, and it fixes other relationships.
Yes. Well, this is what you see in Zen practice. You see, when you have a cushion in Zen practice, the cushions are pretty hard, right? So you get one of those hard cushions and you place it under the spine. Now it elevates your spine. When you sit full lotus, you're forming a triangle. It's a very stable position. Now, the interesting thing is you align your crown chakra with your center of gravity. What's your center of gravity? It's your second chakra. Yeah, it's right under the navel. So when you align those two, you are aligned with gravity. That means sitting becomes more effortless because you're not leaning forward, you're not leaning backward. When you lean forward, you need muscle tension in the back. When you lean backward, you need muscle tension in the stomach.
Right.
So when you align your crown chakra, at some point you can feel gravity on the crown chakra. Because if you lean forward too much, you feel the center of gravity moving backwards. If you
what you're describing is what we call the Rolf line that runs through the ear, the shoulder. You know, when you see the skeleton with the sideways view and you hold up a plumb bob relative to the ear, the shoulder, the hip, and the knee, and that line runs, you know, perfectly through the body if you wanted to take that weight and distribute it correctly to the ground. That's what that line is. That line you're feeling right there. It's interesting that they call it I guess in the second chakra, you would consider that the area of the Dantian, correct?
Well, you mean the Chinese term? I don't know, but I would say a few centimeters below the navel.
Right. Okay. That's oftentimes where the center of gravity is used to measure, because if you measure from the head to the ground, and then from the navel directly for a woman, a little bit lower for a man, this is the Egyptian tradition, it would give you the phi ratio, 1.618. If the length of your torso and everything was correct above that point, and the length of your legs and everything going into your pelvis down below was the correct length, you'd end up on this phi ratio, okay? Which means you are correctly related from top to bottom. And the models I've seen from Ida Rolf show the center of gravity actually going further down from the second chakra all the way into the pelvic bowl. And this is where they represent, even on the plumb bob, on the medical charts, they show the center of gravity there, okay? Well, it turns out right at that point is where your coccyx bone turns into the interior part of your pelvis, which is a crazy shaped bone anyway, right? If you look at the pelvis in terms of an energy reshaping device, a waveguide, if you will, with a bunch of foramen holes in the back that are certain distant apart, imagine sending a frequency or a sound wave in there and analyzing what it would do, okay? Well, it turns out it looks to me like the entire spinal column is a human meat modem. That means receiver and transmitter. In the reception part, you're using the spine that aggregates these, what Thoth calls the acoustic energy, all the way down into the pelvic bowl, which looks like it concentrates through a waveguide direction right onto the ganglion of Impar, which is the nerve complex, your bottom chakra, your last chakra, this is your first chakra, on the bottom of your coccyx bone. And the reason I say that, that's where the potential Kundalini energy is represented as a coiled snake, right? So if you can wake up that one, it starts traveling up the Ida Pingala nadis, up through the Sushumna, and then ultimately ends up with the wings of Hermes, right? That's what you want, where the lateral ventricles have opened, and the both sides of the brain have had hemisphere, basically hemisync, right? That's the ultimate human experience in terms of energy as represented by the caduceus. That's what that symbol represents. Wings of Hermes, pineal
Yeah.
gland firing, lateral ventricles, all the fluids flowing, okay, and the Ida Pingala nadis twisted around the Sushima are fully active where the chakras are working and the being's awake.
All right.
And
So what does, in that sense, the Kundalini, you see, that is very interesting because the Kundalini is referenced in so many mystical schools, in alchemical schools. You understand the mystical symbolism,
mm-hmm,
yeah,
mm-hmm,
then it gets tremendously obvious, yeah, at some point. Yeah, it's very important not to overemphasize mind, but at some point, and what you do see, you see the patterns everywhere.
right,
That
right.
the knowledge was there for those type of disciples who would be able, at a certain level of intuition, to recognize the symbolism and make sense of it. To someone who's trapped in the intellect, certain mystical writings don't make sense.
Right,
You need to have activated a certain frequency of information. You need to be able to channel that in order to make sense of it. So when the Kundalini starts, well, I try to give a little bit, you see, I'm not a scientist, but I try to use the vocabulary a little bit to put it into terms that the Western mind can understand.
right.
So what the Kundalini essentially does, it recalibrates the nervous system. And it does it so profoundly that when the Kundalini starts, it is a shock. It is a shock to the system. Many, when they start practicing Kundalini yoga, at first they get sick because the input that the nervous system gets, the stimulation that the nervous system gets, creates a stress response. And that's why when we speak about Kundalini yoga, I want to make it very clear, if your basic meditation practice is not so strong that you can sit in a no-mind state for half an hour, don't start the Kundalini. Because when it does, what it will do, everything that keeps your avatar in a low energy state, it will enter your consciousness. Because the Kundalini, when it starts raising up the spine, it starts stimulating all the chakras, the Kundalini tries to increase the frequency of the system. So everything that blocks higher energy states needs to leave the system or be transformed. Now, when that happens, you get sick, you throw up, you feel miserable for weeks. This is also what happens, by the way, in ayahuasca ceremonies and psychedelic ceremonies. People start throwing up because whatever keeps the energy system low needs to leave the body. But it also enters your psyche. So if you have not learned through Zen practice to keep the nervous system calm in extreme situations, do not practice the Kundalini, because this is then the cause of psychosis. I want to make this very clear. Yeah,
I think you're right.
Education before we go there.
No, I think you're right. If I were to generalize what you said, if you do something to try to short circuit, wake your human energy system up too rapidly without having done any preparatory work at all, it could be, the results could be quite catastrophic. It reminds me of, like, if you were to take a psychopath and start elevating their whole energy, like a rising tide lifting all boats, that kind of thing. Well, wherever they're at and whatever they're doing right then, you pour more fuel on that, and they're going to do that even harder, right? So if you're doing something that's terrible, you're probably going to do something even more terrible, you know? And that goes...
Let's say whatever is in you will find expression.
Exactly. That's a better way to say it. That's a better way to say it.
So if you're not familiar with shadow work, if you don't understand the psychology of shadow work, if you don't understand the alchemical principles of shadow work, I want to make this very clear. The alchemical principle of energy is energy can only be redirected or transformed. It cannot be blocked. And what happens when the Kundalini rises is like a tsunami is starting in you. And your ego will try to block that tsunami by building a wall, and the ego is going to get crushed. And when it does that and tries to recreate identity from all the psychic information that's suddenly spilling into your system, this is when psychosis happens. Now, this might be interesting to you. I recently had a student who, when he was 16, his Kundalini activated. Now he's much older, but at the time, suddenly he became psychic. Now, everyone around him in the conservative German ideology, yeah, so to speak, their belief system, their egos felt intimidated by the things that he was revealing to them. So what did happen there is then, because of societal pressure, because all the relationships were endangered, that in him there was a decision to cling on to the ego. So the identity of being a psychotic person was taken to save the relationships. So ego was chosen over, and now it comes, Christ consciousness. Because what does the Kundalini do? It brings you in touch with Christ consciousness. Let's speak about it, what that means. Christ consciousness is a frequency. So Carl Gustav Jung, the great psychologist, when he spoke about archetypes, when he spoke about the collective unconscious and archetypes that exist within the collective unconscious, what he called the collective unconscious, I would call the psychic internet. This is basically the collection of human awareness in which information is stored, for example, through those archetypes that we also know through the tarot cards, for example, right? One of the parts of the mystical schools of Egypt. Yeah. So when we do understand that we have intelligence on other frequencies, at some point during the Kundalini process, people start hearing voices. They suddenly realize there are thoughts being projected into my brain, but they're not my own thoughts. If they're not stable enough through meditation, let's say, since they're still experiencing polarity, different voices are coming in. Not all of them are kind. There are also voices that try to distract you from awakening. This has been shown in many mystical stories. Yeah, Jesus being tempted by Lucifer, Buddha being tempted by the demon snake Mara. This is when, in deep meditation, your Kundalini reaches a state where you're vulnerable. Now you can be pulled either on one of the sides of the polarity. But in order to realize your Christ consciousness or your Buddha nature, you need not to choose polarity at all. So when you do that, and you do not get in any type of resistance, at some point, what we experience subjectively as negative voices starts quieting down. And suddenly we are developing a more and more stable link with what you could perceive as the higher self. So suddenly you start talking to all your incarnations. So I had situations where I was talking to clients or to students, and one of my previous incarnations keeps coming in it and suddenly shares information with their student. So in that sense, I know it's not Julian, but I know it's also me. You see? Because it's a part of my consciousness existing on another, let's say, level of information, of energy.
Right.
So when we figure that out, at some point we realize, oh, we're not only channeling our higher self, but suddenly teachers start appearing. And they start helping you download knowledge and information, yeah, that helps you escaping the matrix. This is the path to enlightenment. There we go.
Is this a good time for you to talk about Alan Watts? You know, I'm reading his book in my own way. That's the title of his book. It's an autobiography. And he was listed in your book as somebody who influenced you as well, was he not, Alan Watts?
Oh, yes.
Talk about that if you want. What's he teaching you right now?
Well, what started happening when I started practicing certain forms of yoga, that I suddenly started channeling. So in that sense, and that's very interesting to me, these were not trance states, because I was conscious while channeling. Yeah, there are some mediums, let's say they let an entity speak through them. But in that sense, I was still there while I would let someone else speak through this avatar. So basically to become a conduit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm still with you. Keep going. I'm just saving bandwidth.
So what happens then, that, let's say, teachers and beings that you might have karma with, that you might have had experiences with, they suddenly start showing up. And first only in voice communication. And what they will explain to you might be the following thing. I asked a while ago my teachers, why do I have to learn so much conceptually? Like, why do I need to read all those mystical books and so on and so on? And at some point it became clear that it is about conditioning this avatar to have a certain amount of language to be able to communicate the teachings no matter what cultural differences I experience. Yeah, so basically I would read about Hinduism, I would read about Buddhism, I would read about Christianity, and so on and so on and so on. So in order to put the teachings into word, I needed to, in that sense, develop a certain language capacity. So how channeling works is that an intelligence enters your brain, and that intelligence starts scanning for the vocabulary that you have. So in order to be a channel, you need to have a wide vocabulary, because the energy that keeps coming in will try to pick a concept that is as close to the energy as possible. The concept is not the true information, it is a translation of the energy coming in. So it is inaccurate, but in order for it to be as accurate as possible, the more vocabulary you have, the more specific you can be. Does that make sense?
It
So
does, and that's one of the reasons we're chatting is because you decided to expand your vocabulary from your native language, speak to people internationally who busted their cultural software so that they could be on the same level as you. So you're kind of a pioneer that way, aren't you?
well, I wouldn't say so, because there are many who have come before me. And in this tradition, I'm one of many. But what I want to emphasize when we speak about this, when we speak about Buddha nature, when we speak about Christ nature, that those who are masters, those who have entered the state of enlightenment and have transcended the world, become the face of Christ consciousness or Buddha nature. So once you understand it, you stop looking for a teacher in form of a person. Yeah, a person is just an avatar, but the teaching can come through different types of avatars. So you stop getting hung up on forms, on personhood. Because once you modify this energy system that you carry by integrating all your trauma, by forgiving the world, by starting to love, by increasing in energy and so on, at some point, you will be able to tune into the collective intelligence of mankind. So then spirits who currently do not exist in the physical state can now share consciousness with you. And once you understand it, you realize this is Christ consciousness. Because what is Christ consciousness? Is collective intelligence. It's not a sense of separateness. So you realize then you still have your localized intelligence, but that localized intelligence exists within an infinite realm of thought that is shared. So basically a psychic internet. So you can Google today, it's a metaphor for it, you see? Everything that happens in physical reality is a metaphor for a state of consciousness. So the internet is a metaphor for what is about to come, is this union in consciousness. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually, I think the term that the Mayans they called it universal consciousness coming in. Uh,
Yes.
I see it as exactly what you're saying, is that we all are from that pool of universal consciousness. And for some reason, in the state of where we are and the celestial mechanics of it all, we're all being given access to this universal consciousness, whether we like it or not, as part of maybe moving our species along on some trajectory that it was supposed to do in the first place, as a experience of a range of consciousness, so that you have a material school experience as an
Yes.
eternal being. And I really think I think we're in the middle of that, and we might be close to the end of that right now in terms of our transition, because the internet did take us to a new level of our understanding of the holographic consciousness, that an avatar watching these events happen through time to our meat modem, which forms memory that's not us, but it's a record of attachments that we oftentimes fall for. And if like what you said, we finally get to the place where we recognize that, and we're part of the light team now. We're part of this Christ consciousness, this universal consciousness that now recognizes the ego and all that was required for this material experience school, this holographic school. But now if you wake up from the school and you're at the other end of, what do you think about graduating? Do we got to do it again, or we got to stay and help? Do we have any choice in that matter?
Well, you might not be conscious of having made a choice, but that choice was made before incarnation. So before incarnation, you might have made a choice to be of service in some way. And then, of course, you need to pick an avatar, and let's speak about that a little bit, what it means to have an avatar. So what was conveyed to us, the reason also why right now there are so many spiritual teachers returning, because there is a great influx of teachers right now. There's so many beings waking up and teaching and sharing their knowledge. In that sense, it's a renaissance. It's a beautiful moment within time where suddenly so much information is available to everyone. It cannot be blocked, that cannot be controlled. So then this information is here to undo the fearful belief structure. So when we undo this fearful belief structure, our energy increases, and then we invite in different types of experience. So what was conveyed to me is that many of those spiritual teachers are actually also preparing humanity for alien contact. And how does that work? Well, humanity is still in a very, let's say, how can I say, we are at a transitional point where a lot of shadow content, a lot of trauma, collective trauma will emerge. It will enter our consciousness, and we need to transmute those energies. And spiritual teachers are assisting us in transmuting those energies. The reason for this is, in order to share an experience with someone, you need to be somewhat similar in frequency. So when we start channeling, those beings who are on a higher energy dimension right now, they need to decrease their frequency, and the one who is the channel needs to increase his frequency temporarily, so you have a match and you have a link. And this is what happens in meditation. You raise your energy temporarily, and someone now who wants to teach you is decreasing the energy, so you meet halfway. So then often alien entities, and it's very important now to not get hung up on the concept of alien entity, because we are all multidimensional beings. Yeah. If you think now of alien entity as a big thing, it's because you identify as human. Yeah. Human is an identity. Alien is an identity. Yeah. So in that sense, your microphone again is struggling.
Sorry, I shouldn't be interrupting you, but I think we're all Anunnaki chimeras. We're all, half Anunnaki, half whatever we were before, Neanderthal, whatever. So.
Yes, but let's say I disagree there a little bit.
Okay.
And where I disagree, you see, the Anunnaki DNA is also not us. This is not who we are.
No.
It's just an avatar, a framework that you work with.
That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying is the avatar framework. Yeah. Yeah. That's not who we are. No.
There we go.
But so that could be done many, many times before that. Okay. So we got that clear, right? Okay. We'll keep going. You're on a roll.
So what is happening is that those, let's say, advanced civilizations that want to assist humanity cannot do that before we have made our transition. Because our energy state is too low. That means if they would come in with the high energy state, our response would be a fight or flight response. Because we have not transcended the animal nature or the biological nature of our avatars. We still identified with them. So a fear response is more likely, which could create great devastation. They don't want that. So what do? Well, simple. Certain souls choose to be a conduit or a communicator and prepare humanity by this contact by taking a human avatar. So you have a human face, is more relatable, is less likely to create a fear response. And then you have channels, for example, in the US, you have this great channel, Daryl Anker. I don't know if you heard about him. It's called Bashar. Yeah. He's also a medium who says he's channeling his future self. Yeah. Who is an alien life form. And he comes through using a previous incarnation as a mode of communication. And when you understand that you exist on a multidimensional level, that means you can exist here, but you can also exist in another incarnation at the same time, because ultimately there is no time. Time is an illusion within the timeless. It is a bubble within the timeless. Once you figure that out, you could be in 10 bubbles at the same time, but you're not unaware of it.
Yeah. Hey, can I ask you a question real quick about that? Do you think the regression therapy that Dolores Cannon was into relates to that topic you just mentioned, this parallel multiple dimensionality where there could be interaction going on like that?
Well, I'm not familiar with that specifically. Can you educate me on that a little bit?
I think it's I think they call it quantum hypnotherapy regression something, QHTP or something like that. Anyway, I thought maybe you might have heard of Dolores Cannon. Oh, there's a whole group of people that are doing, I don't know, past life regression, but they're doing it more
Yes.
also from a multi-dimensional standpoint like this, where that being could be, you know, from a future time or whatever, and interacting and conveying messages like that, like what you said. I've listened to a few of the therapists that have done sessions with people, and it seems to be the way it's going. I don't know whether it adds authenticity or a filter to somebody operating as a channel. For me, the very first thing that I have to start with is, you know, if you've got an unconditioned mind and can be a pure channel for information that doesn't put it askew, I think there's value there. But if it's going through your ego and all that, it's like,
Yes.
okay, that's ugly. But for people who have learned to access the unconditioned mind, like what you're doing, I think it could be very, very valuable. So tell me more about your experience. How's it going with that?
Yes.
Especially Alan Watts, you know, because I'm kind of a fan so far.
Well, are you familiar with the book A Course of Love?
A what?
A Course of Love.
No.
All right.
From him? From
no.
him?
That gets very interesting. There is I think she is American. Her name is Marie Perron, and she started channeling, let's say, the entity that we would call Jesus, and had this book dictated to her. So when you read A Course of Love, an ego cannot have written that. It is profound mystical teaching. Yeah, someone who is in an ego state cannot make up that type of writing. So when you read it, you know it is authentic. So one time I was sitting with my wife in a cafe, and suddenly I had a contact with Alan Watts. It's not the first time, yeah. And I feel it's an old friend, and very familiar. And he used me as a channel to speak to my wife. And A Course of Love was on the table, and he tried to explain to her a holographic reality. So he said the following thing: do you really believe that there's a book on the table? He said, there is no book on the table. It is the teaching. It's just the teaching takes the form of the metaphor of a book in order to be conceivable for you. And often when we get serious, when we get caught up in our localized intelligence, he makes jokes. to not take ourselves so serious, you see. But it's not only him coming in, there are many coming in. They're not necessarily revealing their identity because it might not be helpful at the time. When you start challenging, the temptation for ego is great. Because you're having this experience and it's easy to feel special. And within this specialness is the sense of separation. And now you're not in a universal state anymore. You enter a state of potential selfishness. So usually I don't like to use names. The reason I don't like to use names, because it can be used to identify with it. But when you start channeling and they keep coming in, the intelligence and the kindness and compassion is so different than experiencing ego thought. You notice when you, let's say when I sit somewhere and I'm getting into a channeling state and I have those dialogues, I experience dialogue for like 3 hours straight. And the intelligence is so much greater than human intelligence. It's just that they use human language in order to, let's say, relate to me in a way that I can make sense of what is being told. And this, of course, let's say some mystics would say, don't share this information with people. They're not ready for that. I don't see it that way. I think everyone deserves an equal chance of having that information shared to them, to get that invitation. If they reject that invitation or take that invitation, is perfectly fine. You see, there's free will in this universe. And not even God overrides this. And at some point when you know you're God, you know you wouldn't override your own free will. So in that sense, when we have those experiences, it's tremendously important to let go of any form of egoic attachment. And this is why we cannot just practice certain types of mysticism without going beyond the ego first, because the chance to be pulled into an egoic state is great. So often I retreat. You remember, like, it's a long time that we talked because I said I needed to figure something out, because I needed to practice to verify the information that I'm getting through strengthening the channel, so to speak, right? And the issue here is, and you said this very clearly, when we start channeling, but our ego is still active, the thoughts are mixing up. You're creating distortion. So the message doesn't come in clearly, it comes in fragmented. And this is the problem then. Ultimately, of course, there is no problem because we're all timeless. You see, we need time to have problems. But the issue being here that we then share this distortion with people and give false information. So to go beyond the ego before attempting such practice is tremendously important. And then you will have moments where beings enter your experience and you will be in awe, in shock even, that this is a possibility that this happens. So if then you cannot maintain calmness and keep your nervous system steady, then you can't be of service. So we try to upgrade our avatar so we can keep our mind steady, to not be disrupted by the external experience or by experience of the psyche or thought, right?
Exactly. And if you can take that ability to respond that way into difficult circumstances in your actual life, out in the street, and still maintain your state, then I see that as victory. Because that's one of the hardest things to do. It's easy to, in the privacy of your own home, to find these wonderful mental states where you're channeling the love of universal consciousness until you get out into a traffic jam. Yeah. So is there I think we covered most of what I wanted to with you today, Julian. Are there any updates on your how the school's going, what your plans are for this new year, things like that?
Yes. Well, let's say when it comes to practice, I don't have many students. You see, only a handful. Mm-hmm. And this sometimes on a personal level, I still experience sometimes some sadness, and I'll tell you why. Because I try to give out invitations to people to go beyond suffering. And often the invitations are not recognized.
Mm.
So the challenge here is not to enter a state of frustration when it happens. Yeah, because when what you start transmitting is of a high frequency, many in a low frequency state experience fear. And the reason for this is a little bit like that. When you've spent your whole life in a dark cave and now you go outside and look in the sunlight, you get blinded.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
So what's the reflex? I go back into the cave because this is what I know. This is where I feel safe. So you go back into the ego. So the challenge of mystics and spiritual teachers is to master the science of stimulation. How much do you stimulate someone so they don't get into a fight or flight response and reject the teaching? So I would avoid lying. So if someone asks me something, I would say what I know. But if I have a sense someone is not ready for a certain information because it would create overstimulation and be a shock to the system, I try to give them this piece by piece so they can slowly integrate it. And some are ready for that and some are not. So some of my students, they practice very deeply. And there are also people who cannot take it. I'm going to be utterly sincere. They cannot take this type of practice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because they get in such a state of resistance and a lot of projection then happens. And so in that sense, I'm trying to master the ability of tuning into how someone else feels, to not overstimulate them. Yeah, to gently guide them into realizing their deeper self.
No more headlocks, rear naked chokes, or anything like that.
No BJJ in my school, man.
Okay, yeah. Well,
Times changing.
I see you as a fantastic teacher, and the fact that you're only having a handful to deal with, it may be all that you can deal with, since you're already in the client business all day long with your other, private practice. You're still seeing clients, right? It's part of your spiritual practice with psychotherapy.
Yes. Well,
okay, so
even there's a drastic shift, because at some point, let's say in life, and most of us are going through this, we're changing identities like a skin is shedding its snake. It's like a snake is shedding its skin, right? So let's say one time, maybe you're a lawyer, another time you're like practicing something else, and so on. So you're going through these identities, not to be trapped in them, but to learn an aspect and to keep that aspect and then enhancing it. So what I found out is very simple, that that right now, I cannot practice conventional psychotherapy anymore. I'm not in alignment with it. I would be inauthentic if I would do so. Mm-hmm. So now I'm in this strange situation that some clients, they do not come back because I'm not offering them clinical treatment, right? So in that sense, the more authentic the teaching gets, the more potential for rejection is there. So it's not smart business practice.
Welcome to trying to run a spiritual life in the matrix. That's right. They clash all the time. It's very hard. I know. Yeah. I know. You'll pull it off. You'll make it work. I have confidence.
Well, from my understanding, it's a team effort on many levels of existence. So it's not only my effort, right? So it's about delegating it to deeper intelligence and to surrender to it, and to trust the law. You see? I
agree. This is where, those things are what spiritual warriors are made of, what you're talking about right there, having to rely on the universe to see that your mission is done. There's only so much you can do, because it's usually much bigger than you are, your mission is, right?
Yes. And to understand then, not to build an ego from the idea I'm in a difficult situation, because it is a collective effort. There are many right now that have deep experiences in other lifetimes, that have gathered great wisdom, who have taken on new bodies in order to be of service to mankind. And since the collective energy is still quite low, you sometimes have this effect like when you have magnets of the same pole, you have this push-off effect. So what I see, the struggle is very simple. Let's say the matrix is a prison, right? It's a mental prison, but that creates an outside manifestation. And the thing is, many human beings, they look for a better job in the prison. They're not looking for escaping the prison. They want to basically upgrade from being a prisoner to being a prison guard, to being the warden, to being the director, right? But they don't want to leave the prison. They're like, I want to go one leg into the spiritual, and one leg I still want to be in the system, because my identity that was only built for need of survival, I don't want to lose it because I have fear of death. And this is what keeps us trapped. So when I propose practice of awakening to people, their fear of death is tremendously triggered. Because everything they believe they know feels endangered just by talking to me. So I have the situation that sometimes it creates resonance, and someone is sitting there and they have a checklist because they are intuitive enough and they're like checkbox, 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 and then they want to practice. But when the identity is too strong, when the trauma is too strong, reaching out to someone is challenging. And in that sense, to practice detachment is then what the mystic needs to do. To not get attached to result within the physical world.
That's so hard. That
Yeah.
that part is so hard. Like producing videos and posting them up and seeing that nobody's watching them for a long time, you know, things like that. Where you're really sharing yourself. I know, right? And for instance, you know. So, yeah. Well, I've kept you quite a while, Julian. Is there anything else you want us to tell people other than what you're going to be doing this year and where they can find you?
Well, obviously you can find me on my website, yeah, julian-polzin.de.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and what I would love to for those listeners who enjoy our conversation, if you want to have questions answered, if you're curious, just write me emails, because I do love the interaction. You see, creation is a dialogue, and dialogues is what create possibilities. Even disagreement increases our wisdom. So in that sense, it's so important that we engage in dialogues. So if some of you are curious and they really want to know, don't be afraid to contact me. Make that leap out of the prison.
Well,
Yeah?
speaking of that creation and dialogue portion, I proposed to you earlier that I think we have a lot to say in our dialogues. Me coming from a different place academically than you did, it synergizes very well. And I remember the synchronicity that we thought was going on early on was a synchronization of different disparate fields that needed to be represented by liaisons like us that were bridging those gaps in seeing a perspective that might be a Western perspective that also brings in people like Alan Watts and others who were able to get a more Eastern religious perspective that kind of helps the unification. But I think I'm actually surprised you're talking about that. You see a connection between your mission and how it's going to influence a new relationship with alien intelligence. And I want to talk more about that next time, if we can.
Sure.
And so when it comes to next time, I think, do you want to do this like once a month, or how often you want to have a dialogue? Because I think we lost track of them last year, but everybody liked that we were having that dialogue. Then we kind of let it stop, but it was random. Maybe we just pick up.
What is very dear to my heart is, you see, while I realize I have a localized avatar that, let's say, a psyche that wants certain things to happen. What I don't want to is to dilute information. So why I think we can do it once a month. If there is a time where I realize I need to enter a deeper spiritual process to really understand something, this is when I don't talk. Because even though it's great to have views, even though it's great to have clients, truth cannot be corrupted. So when I feel out of the need of the localized psyche, I would do something, for example, to generate certain views, so I won't do it. So I will only talk if I have something to say. Does that make sense?
Yeah, actually it does. And I think I experienced something like that recently when I completely shut off my connection to social media for about 4 weeks. Because I was in that place that you just described, where I was dealing with truth and the idea of sharing anything or being in the localized intelligence, which we often do because that's what we have to do or we see that as our foot in the matrix because we still have to make money and pay rent and all those other things, right?
Mm-hmm.
It would sure be much better for our spiritual development, were we not to have to deal with having to struggle to have the basics that it needs to survive on this planet.
I disagree with that, actually. I think
disagree?
This is the spiritual practice.
The struggling to have enough money to pay for where you live.
You see, this is the crucifixion of Jesus. Understand? To hold on to your Christ consciousness, to hold on to your Buddha nature, no matter what happens in the external experience, not to be trapped in survival instinct, not to be trapped in identifying with your avatar when the going gets tough. This is our spiritual practice. It might not be comfortable, but if we don't do it, if we are not the example of the possibility of that, of holding on to authenticity, no matter what happens, you see, this is the example of the crucifixion.
I agree. I agree.
To who you are, no matter what happens.
But do you think that extends to food, water, and shelter? I mean, the very basics for survival?
Yes. I want to be very honest with you. Since I started teaching more openly, since I've not been holding back, I have been losing a lot of clients. Right? Mm-hmm. My ego would then, in that sense, wanting to enter is like, don't you want to hold back a little bit? Don't you want to keep things secret? Yeah? Because the Matrix program then says, but we got to survive.
Well, this is the crazy part. Maybe we do another show on that and talk about that, because that's quite a topic right there. Because I think a lot of people that are waking up are dealing with that issue right now. Like, how do I be in the world but not of it? You know, like Jesus said.
I rather sacrifice this body than speaking untruth.
I hear you.
It's not complicated.
I hear you. And I've been at that same place several times in my path. And we could talk about those too, that they could be quite interesting.
Oh, yes. And I think that is wonderful, because in that sense, this is the deep spiritual practice. There you can also relate on a deeper level to your listeners, because many of them have those questions. Most of my students, when they start waking up through meditation practice, they have two questions. What do I do about my job? What do I do about my family? Because they don't want to slave anymore. They don't want to slave anymore. So they ask themselves, how can I transition from unconscious work to conscious work? How can I offer a service to humanity that is also paid, but in alignment with who I am?
Exactly.
This is the struggle that humanity collectively goes through. And this is where people make compromises. And because they make compromises out of fear, we have a fear system. We need to stop compromising who we are. We need to stop selling our souls and taking on jobs that we don't want to do just to make the avatar survive. And to many of us, that sounds extreme, but if we do this as a collective, this system is done from one day to another, if there's no fear of death. So this is why we need to wake up spiritually, because if you have direct confirmation that you're something more than the body, it's so much harder to corrupt you. It's so much harder to entice you with something worldly. And then you can be true.
Like a bratwurst sandwich and a whole liter of Kostritzer beer, like that. I'm kidding. The Germans have very
there. It's wonderful there. Yeah.
Germans
but
have
if
very,
it's not
very,
there, it's also okay.
They have very good culinary offerings, don't they? Do you like German? Do you like the food there?
Well, since I eat a vegetarian diet and don't drink alcohol.
Well, you used to though, didn't you?
Well, yes. And the answers to that are simple. Like, why did that change? But it's very simple. I try to be as conscious as I can be. And they are consciousness expanding substances like psychedelics, but they are consciousness diluting substances like alcohol.
Right? Well, once you start waking your avatar body up, you don't like those consciousness diluting ones anymore because you're more susceptible to the suffering in the simulator. Like you're like, okay, let's get the energy right and stop the suffering and get on out of here, right?
That's right, because in that sense, your ability to being present, to be in the timeless you, and when you are in the timeless you, you're not trapped in time, you still experience time. But then the suffering is more like something that happens in a distance, like you watch a thunderstorm in the distance, but you're not trapped in personhood anymore. The suffering comes from believing to be a person. When you're deeply meditative and mindful in day-to-day life, and you watch the person, the suffering is exactly that, not personal anymore. It's just a happening. It might still be uncomfortable, but you're not caught up in it. But when you take certain substances, you're trying to regulate your emotions in an unconscious way. So in that sense, substances that dull my ability to stay present, I have no interest in. And the reason why I don't eat meat is very simple. When I would eat animals, I would eat younger versions of myself because they are souls too. And why we have an avatar body, it is not 100% possible to not create suffering, but you can try to reduce it as much as possible. And those of us who have deep relationships with animals, we recognize their love and their intelligence. So then why make them suffer?
Yeah. There's a new movie out that my buddy Ian Jacklin just recommended. I think he called it Endgame or Ender's Game. That had something to do with an impact on somebody's dietary choice and their health choices. I'll have to go look into it and see what it's about. But anyway, he mentioned I was talking to him the other day. But diet definitely has a huge impact on your human energy too.
Yes.
For instance, if you don't eat any animal products, you'll still have massive amounts of things to eat, and you don't have this feeling like you're extorting anywhere along the kingdom, phylum, class, orders, or species or variety, that you're extorting that chain such that you can survive, really. Some people say eating plants, it's just as bad as eating an animal, but I really don't see it that way. And and my body doesn't respond that way either. It hasn't for over 10 years. So, we slip every once in a while, but we're very happy vegans and practically disease-free. It's amazing how healthy you can be just having a plant-based lifestyle. And, and recently we've been looking at even making it even better by paying a little more attention to our alkalinity than we had been. And just the small changes we've done, since we were already eating things that were mostly alkaline anyway, has really benefited us a lot. I had to cut out coffee, Julian.
Oh,
that's the only. I could still have all these other drinks and stuff and things that are just great, but because of the acidity of what coffee was doing in my system, I feel better having cut it out, even though it's been, I don't know, almost like a unconscious thing. I'd have really just one pot in the morning and we would split it. So it wasn't a lot, but it was having an effect that I didn't realize how impactful it was.
Yes.
So things like that.
Well, it can definitely, when you drink too much caffeine, it can definitely deplete your neurotransmitters.
Maybe that's
something to consider. Yeah, because you basically constantly doping your system to be in a high alert state. So you're trying to basically, when your body is tired, to not listening to the tiredness and accept it and rest, but then you try to amplify it with caffeine. That means your body is constantly overworking. It's just because of the substance, you don't feel it. So at some point you can't sleep anymore because the default system of the default state of the nervous system has been switched to a higher aroused state. And then people can't calm down after too much caffeine.
Are you drinking coffee? Is that what you showed me or no?
Yeah, I'm drinking coffee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah? But I also sometimes reduce it when I realize that my nervous system starts struggling. Yeah. At some point, I might also completely let go of it, but I haven't yet.
Oh, I see.
Still enjoy it.
Well, listen, it's been an absolutely wonderful hour and a half with you today.
Mm.
I'm so happy we're caught up. And if it happens once a month, fine. I won't put it on any kind of schedule thing. And we'll just touch base with each other like we did last year. And if we have stuff we want to talk to, then we'll talk. Is that cool?
All right.
Sound good? Okay.
Let's do that.
All right. I sure love you. And I appreciate all that you've opened up and shared with me and with my audience. And we'll talk to you again next time. Okay.
Thank you for allowing me to share, because this, yeah, to have a platform to express oneself authentically without any form of censoring is tremendously valuable.
Agreed.